From the GHJ Media Clips archive, prolific producer Eric B. FLEISCHMAN describes the world of the independent producer. Eric has made 33 movies in 9 years, some as official selections at Sundance, Tribeca, and South by Southwest. Read Eric's chapter Producing in the DIY Model in the Movie Business Book. This interview is from April 2020 with me and host Ilan Haimoff, head of the Profit Participation Services practice at GHJ. Listen up.
I'd like to welcome everyone back to our Movie Business Podcast series, where our focus is discussing on making sense of the new motion picture ecosystem. With me today is Jason Squire, who I'll introduce shortly, as well as Eric FLEISCHMAN, who will be introduced by Jason. So first, I'd like to welcome my partner in crime, Jason Squire, who is the editor of the Movie Business Book and professor at the USC School of Cinematic Arts. Sorry for mispronouncing that. Jason, with that, I'll let you introduce Eric.
Thanks so much, Ilan. And Eric, welcome. Working at places like Paramount's In Surge and Blumhouse, right out of USC, Eric B. FLEISCHMAN gained the tools to perfect a micro-budget model and build a career producing some 28 features in 8 years. He was the youngest producer to premiere 2 features at Sundance in a single year, Carnage Park and Slight, with other features premiering at Tribeca and South by Southwest shortly thereafter. He was chosen as one of the Forbes 30 Under 30 in entertainment in 2018 and has just wrapped off-season his recent feature collaboration with Carnage Park writer-director Mickey Keating. Welcome, Eric, to the podcast.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
It's great that you're here. Why don't we lead off by describing the business model for micro-budget movies?
Sure. There's definitely a strict mentality, I think, that one must take when you approach micro-budget filmmaking, and that is inherently within the title itself. It's keeping it micro-budget. Now, I think different people define micro-budget differently. In the studio space, micro-budget is really anything under $5 million. But I think if you're talking about true independent film, micro-budget is really anything under 1, maybe 1.2 if you're pushing it. So it's 1.2 million. Anything below that is considered micro-budget. And you really have to adhere to those numbers because obviously if you balloon over, you sort of, what's the best word to describe this? It doesn't make sense to make micro-budget movies if you can't hold yourself to, I would say, micro-budget mentality, right? And that is keeping a strict budget, keeping a strict schedule, making sure that every dollar that is being allocated in the budget is really being used on screen, which comparatively to large studio films, that's not the case, right? Our movies aren't even the catering budget on Transformers 6. So it's at this level, I think I would almost argue you get a higher quality picture because you are more or less forced to put every dollar you can on the screen, right, to show for itself. And with that, obviously, with that price range usually comes a non-union crew, right? Comparatively larger films, not even if you're studio, but if you're 1.5, 2 million and over, you're working with IATSE and the Teamsters, and you have to hire a union crew. If you're micro budget, you usually work with non-union crew members, which doesn't mean they're better or worse. In fact, a lot of non-union crew members work more than union crew members. But beyond that, there's a lot of similarities, right? We both levels are SAG projects. Sometimes you work with DGA, sometimes you work with WGA, sometimes you work with both. And all the guilds, being SAG, WGA, and DGA, have low, micro budget, low budget thresholds, which they sort of give you, we'll say, quote unquote discounts, right? Give you sort of financial breaks in your spending. And it really sort of, I think on the creative side, it causes the filmmakers to really think outside the box, because you don't have an infinite number of days. You have a very limited number of days, right? You're lucky if you get 20 days on a micro budget film. And so you have to get creative with not only your story, but how all of those elements, both non-physical and physical, interact with each other so that you can really make the most out of it.
Is it also true that it's unlikely there's any more money beyond the allocated amount?
I guess it would depend on who your financiers are. I would say if you're working, if you're the independent filmmaker or producer, let's say, if you're the independent film producer who's doing a movie with a group of financiers and it's just one movie, then it's going to depend on those people's personalities and whether or not you're asking for more money because it's premiering at Sundance and you need money to get there, or you went over budget and you're still in post and you just didn't do your job right? There's different things that you need to ask money for. It's easier to request additional funds if you have a really strong working relationship with the financial partners that you're working with, meaning maybe this isn't the first film you've worked on. But again, I think when it comes to asking for additional funds, which is something that we still do depending on, what the situation is, we try to make it where we're asking for additional funds rarely, A, right? You rarely should ask for them. And B, you're asking for them because something really great has happened and you actually need it because you need to take the film to this festival, or so-and-so distributor bought the film and they need you to dub the film in French, and that's going to cost extra money, but, it's going to theaters. So that is the best scenario. Now, is that the most common? No. Usually the most common scenario is you went over budget for whatever reason and you need more money, and then it really is up to them, right? I luckily have not been in this situation, but I know plenty of people who've gone over budget and then asked for money and said no, and then it's like, what do you do? And what you do is again, like we talked about a second ago, is you get creative. You have to think outside the box. What do I have at my disposal? What footage do I have? What sound designers do I have at my disposal? Can I at least color it? Can I get a face? It's a little bit more of guerrilla style, right? Guerrilla style filmmaking through and through.
Yeah, let me actually jump into a couple of things that we're hoping you can share, is what is going on right now, because I think you were discussing the potential for over budgets and whether the financiers will accept it or not. I'm trying to figure out at the current market, what opportunities, what challenges do you see in producing the micro budget movies themselves? Are you seeing more financing? Are you seeing more interest? Are you seeing more distribution platforms interested in the programs that you're creating? Just trying to get a sense of what the trends might be for the coming months. There has been, and I think there will continually will be, a growing appreciation and interest in micro budget films, because you're seeing them now translate upwards to even the Oscars, right? Because Moonlight is a micro budget movie, right? Moonlight was made for, I think maybe they needed more money to get there, but I think it was 1.2, right? It was there was the full budget of the original movie before obviously it was bought and went through the process, but that's what they made it for, right? You're also more likely to profit financially off of micro budget films, especially if you work in the genre space, which is sci-fi, horror, thrillers, because there's a huge demand for them from both audience and streamers obviously and distributors listening to the audience. But you're sort of seeing this sort of growing, the gap where the middle tier movies used to exist, movies that were made from 15 to 50 are gone. And so now you have really expensive films, right? Large studio films like The Irishman, right? And then on the other end, you have stuff that's really 10 and below. And then if you look at that model, it's really 5 to 10 and 2 and below,
right? There's nothing really from 2 to 5, because there's a bunch of 4s, but those are the 4 millions I'm seeing are more like international plays where like you're getting so-and-so who has this much value and their value is 4 million. So you're going to make a movie for 4. So if you're just designing a movie from scratch and you're trying to raise money, you do want to focus on the lower tier because there's a greater chance for your film to get bought. There's a greater chance for your film to make money. And with the advent of, now you have Peacock and HBO Max, and every single distributor is coming out with their own streaming platform to compete with Netflix, right? And Hulu. Everyone needs content now. Everyone needs content. And so it's a really great time to be working, I think, in independent film because people just need to be buying stuff. And, they are you sort of look at the landscape, you see, buyers are only going to spend a certain amount of money on a certain movie, right? No one's just writing $10 million checks left and right to buy every single movie they can. People are usually spending, by the way, even on, I know movies that have been made for $10 million that sell for $600,000, right? Because the price point at which people are buying are, and the best case scenario, right? The most common best case scenario, high 6 figures, maybe low million, 0.5, right? Now, this doesn't include like the Sundance ones that explode off the screen like Palm Springs, right? Or it doesn't include stuff like, I'm trying to think of another good example. Palm Springs is the most recent one, right? That sold for 17.5 and 0.69 cents.
Right.
But you can't like bank on that. You can't be like, oh, we'll just sell it for that much. You have to assume that your film is going to be good enough to sell, but maybe not good enough to get into a festival. So like, who's going to buy this film and can I sell for a price? So if you think about A, everyone wants content. B, no one wants to spend millions and millions of dollars per film on that content. C, I want to make movies and have my movies bought and still make more movies and more money. You have to look at the landscape and say, okay, I don't need to spend, or I shouldn't, if I'm fiscally responsible, I shouldn't be spending $2 million on a movie independently that I might sell for $200,000, right? That is too big of a risk. So I think that's why
As a follow-up to that, though, Eric, what would be a reasonable or fair or whatever the going market might be in terms of ROI when the film gets sold in the festival or outside the festival in terms of the cost recovery? So you would get the cost recovery plus something more. What would be like a fair and reasonable ROI to kind of to shoot for, to hope for in this market? If you were just to sell it all right to a third party.
So you're saying, okay. So what you're saying is I make a movie. What's the budget of my movie?
So $1 million.
Any budget?
Yeah.
Okay, it's $1 million, and I'm going to a festival, or I'm just selling it at a buyer screening outside of a festival.
Either way, or both.
Well, there's a festival. I would say a festival greatly increases, not by huge, but does increase the chances of a more profitable sale. I would say, and then it also depends on the festival that you're going to. So I guess I'll answer it in a form, but there really is no like magic number. I wish there was. I think if you make a standout movie, and again, and it also talks about genre, right? Because like dramas are harder to sell, comedies are harder to sell. So like the answer to your question, I have a million answers depending on 1,000 different specs. But like, let's say we're only focusing on genre films, right? Let's like narrow it down. So if you're making let's say you're making horror films. You're making horror films for $1 million. And let's say you go to Sundance, right? You go to Sundance, you premiere, and people go crazy over your movie, right? Gaga crazy. Out of Sundance, I mean, like you look at this year, David Bruckner's movie, Night House sold for 12 mil. Right now, would that have sold for that much if it wasn't at Sundance? Possibly, because it's David Bruckner and he made The Ritual that was on Netflix, and he's obviously has like a great deal of projects underneath his belt. I think if you take a film like Parks, I don't want to give any movie titles out. I would say if you're a betting person, You make a movie for $1 million and you don't get a festival, the movie's really, really good. Domestically, you would want to hope for like $500,000, $600,000 of a minimum guarantee and still retain the international to sell separately, so you can maybe recoup, your budget back plus 20%. You always want to hit the break-even point as quickly as possible, and then of course hit the interest rate as quickly as possible, so that you are selling a film for 120% of what you made it for, and then your profits should kick in sooner. But that's not the case all the time. I have plenty of friends who've made movies for, like I said, I know somebody made a horror movie for 1.75 independently, didn't get into any festivals, and they sold it domestically for $350,000. So there is no formula to use. It really comes to what's the movie about? Is it needed? Who's in it? What's the quality? Did it go to a festival? All these things are sort of factored in there. So if there was like a best case answer, believe me, I would not be telling you about it because I'd be using it to make lots of money right now. So we're working on that. We're working on that.
So finally, what are some other guidelines of low-budget producing? For example, choosing a writer-director, so it's one less person to have any to argue with, I guess. You mean the positive version is bounce ideas off of? Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's definitely there's mechanisms that you can take that alleviate some of these stresses that would normally come with independent films. So like you said, yes, working with a writer-director is easier than working with a writer and director separately. Not that it's impossible. We certainly do it all the time, but it's easier because it is one brain, right? You definitely want to have crew members that you've worked with time and time again. It's really stressful when you are, especially in non-union, because non-union means that you could be unionized, right? The union, IATSE could find you and try to flip you. So if you have a really good relationship with your crew members and your crew members are repeat offenders on your films, it makes it a little bit easier to get a higher quality because they enjoy working with you, enjoy working with them, keeping things local. So wherever you are and where your resources are, shooting there, meaning, for us, we shoot mostly in LA. If you're listening to this and you live in Alabama and you like shooting movies, you should, shoot in Alabama. So it's using your readily accessible, either whether it's personnel, equipment rentals, talent. It's a little bit easier on the mind and the wallet when you're doing things local. Now, of course, doesn't mean you can't push yourself, right? Doesn't mean I want to shoot a movie in Bangkok. It's you can do that if you know how to, but obviously there's no trick to the trade there. And then something else I would sort of say is, we as a company focus primarily on first-time filmmakers, and a lot of major companies like Panavision helps out. I mean, Panavision is one that we work with a lot, where they'll give you, discounts on studio cameras because you're a first-time filmmaker. So there's elements like that too. A lot of people will give you help, whether with costs or discounts or whatever, if you're working with someone who's categorized as young Hollywood, because obviously there's a growing demand and need for the next generation of filmmakers to start emerging.
Well, your company is called Defiant Studios, so we're certainly looking forward to the next slate of Defiant Studio movies.
Thank you both, Jason, for co-moderating the discussion, and for you, Eric, to join us and share more of your day-to-day challenges and the fun you're doing and the great work that you're doing. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.